Hi everybody, this is for Criminal Justice 101, Section 352. This video is going to be for week 2. It's going to be for the week through January 25th through January 31st. Some of you are coming in a little bit late to the course or enrolling within the first week. That's all good. Everything is going to be posted online for now, so you're not missing out on anything. If you're having any trouble figuring out what to do, just send me an email. So if you haven't finished up last week's assignment yet, by the time I get this posted, you'll probably still have a little bit of time to do it. That one's not due until January 24th. Just as a reminder, you're posting everything to the discussion board. After you post your assignment, you have access to everybody else's assignment that they posted as well. So I'll give you some feedback to give you a couple critiques to see what you need to improve or change. And then you can go and look at everybody else's work and see who's done what right. You can model your work after them as well. This is the closest thing I can do to doing like an in-class discussion, because usually the first week of class, especially in a 101 course, we have some folks that are new to the college, new to criminal justice, new to everything. So everybody comes in with a little bit different perspective of how to do different things, how to write papers, how to do citations, how to appropriately fill out, the required length of an assignment. So if you haven't seen it already, I think about half of you already have your first reply posted, and then you got to reply to some of your classmates. Some of the common things that we see every semester is just not following the instructions of the assignment. So for instance, one of the portions of the assignment says, hey, write at least 3 paragraphs. One of the most common things that happens is people don't write 3 paragraphs. One of the other things I didn't even realize, I wasn't clear enough, when I said to create citations, what we're talking about is the citation that you would put into a reference or bibliography page, the full citation for what you're working with, not just what an in-text citation is. So that was something I wasn't clear enough on, but we're able to get corrected because we can all share and show those experiences. So if you haven't done it already, head on over to your discussion tab. Hopefully this will get posted before the due date of the 24th. Click on the discussion. Remember, you got to go in, answer your own questions, and then reply to a few of your classmates. There's already 3 or 4 people who have posted, so as long as you get something posted now, there's enough people to reply to, and you'll be able to get that done. So for this week, what we're going to do is I'm going to introduce you to our Chapter 1 or Week 2 assignment, because now we at least know how to work Canvas, how to go on to discussion boards, how to submit assignments. This next assignment, I'm going to ask that you submit it to me through the Assignments tab instead of the Discussions tab. And after we do it both ways, we're going to see which one we like better, if we want to have access to everybody's assignments or if we want to submit things one-on-one as we go forward. And it'll also be kind of dictated by the quality of the work to see what's going to be most effective for us going forward. A couple of side notes, I had some tech issues, which I think are resolved. The editing software, so I should hopefully be able to edit out some of the longer durations if I'm searching for something or pulling up something on the screen. And I had a microphone issue where it was not synced to the video. I think I have it corrected. It may just be a little bit off, but as long as you're not watching my mouth as we're clicking through, you should be fine. So for this week, and one last thing before we get going. February 1st is the tentative return date for the college. It's not set in stone, so make sure you check with each of your classes individually whether or not they're going to meet if you're in a hybrid course. For our class, I'm just going to let you know ahead of time, don't count on meeting for at least another few weeks. And I'm saying that because everything has gotten pushed back so many times and so often. Things have changed so much. I'm going to hold everything to an online course for us for right now. I'll make myself available as we get through, and I'll let you know what times will be available, and I'll probably even come to the college if you need me to come in. But for the time being, just plan on doing this as like a partially online course. And part of the reason is that even though infection rates will be going down, I don't know all of your medical histories, and it's not my business what your medical histories are. So some of you might be in a high-risk category, some of you may not be, some of you may be comfortable coming in, some of you may not be comfortable coming in. And for me to come in and lecture and then record it and post it online, I can just record the stuff and post it online for you, and then you do it at your leisure. Or you can work on it if you're already in the school. You can work on it at the time that would be our class anyway. But I can keep doing it like this. It covers all of our bases. Everybody gets access to everything. And then as we go forward, maybe I'll set up some dates that I'll come into the college and actually, help you out one-on-one if you are in a small group, because there's only, I think, 10 or 11 people in the course anyway. So tentatively, we're going to run this as an online course until we're sure we're in the clear with COVID and vaccines and everybody's good to go, which will probably be a little bit later in the semester that we can actually do some in-person meetings. So be flexible. I know you signed up for hybrid class, so we'll try to get you in as we're able to. But for the time being, count on it being a somewhat online course for at least maybe the first half, and then we'll work on more stuff as we go through. So this is week 2. What we're going to do is chapter 1. I apologize. I work out of my basement. If I could pan the video over, I'm actually in my laundry room, and the furnace is in here. So the furnace might kick on. You might hear some dogs. You might hear some babies screaming. That's just kind of life how it is right now. So for week number 1, you're going to need access to your textbook. You'll go in. I'm sorry, this is week 2, chapter 1. You'll go into your textbook. I would encourage you to read the chapter. It's actually very short. It's not like a regular textbook where you'd have to sit there and read it for hours. I read through it in a pretty short time, and it's fairly interesting. I would say that you don't have to read the whole thing, though. What I'm going to do is I'm going to show you the assignment and the learning objectives that I pulled from the book. I edited them a little bit so that they're more relevant. And then I'm just going to talk you through the questions that I'm asking you to complete for the assignment. I'm going to bring in outside source material and give you access to everything so that you have it to work on. So let's get started with that. This time around, it'll be in the assignments tab that I post up, and I will make the entire thing, this entire lecture note piece available to you. So this is chapter 1, Crime Justice in the United States. We might pair up some chapters later so that we get through the book quicker. But we're just going to focus on one thing at a time. Like I said, I front load the course, so we get through week to week to week. We have a little bit of work each week to get through. So for assignment number 1, it's going to be sort of 2 parts. Part 1, basic definitions. I'll talk through them real quick, and I'll need you to go into your book, get the actual definitions, type them out. This way you get to hear me talk about it a little bit, you read about it, and then you write about it, so you can retain these as you go forward. This is Criminal Justice 101. These are terms you're going to hear through the rest of your duration. And like I showed you before, or showed you from the last assignment, there's a book definition, and then there's some other definitions. And they all kind of mean the same thing. A lot of it's driven by context, so this will help you learn and retain some of this knowledge. And then part 2, I'm going to give you just a couple of short questions, or a couple of questions to give short answers to. This is, I encourage you to think critically on these questions. So each of them is based off of something in the book, and I'll be trying to bring in some outside resources to each one, which I'll present to you here in the video. Because again, I can't show you the book on these open source pieces. It might end up being a copyright violation. So each of these things, it's like 2 paragraphs, and you look through, you're like, oh, I have to write so many paragraphs. It's really not that bad. So the first 4 questions, you just need to write 2 paragraphs for each. And paragraph number 1 is just generally an introduction to the question. You're sort of restating it in your own terms. And then the second paragraph, just tell me what you think about it based on what you read in the book and based on the material I give to you. And then cite anything that you pull from those sources. It's really easy. It's basically like having a conversation. You're just typing it out. And then number 5, I think we're going to do at least 3 paragraphs because I did a ton of reading, and I'm going to try to present to you some of the material that I found. And this question deals with something that you're going to deal with and hear about for probably your next however long you're in college or in a career in law enforcement or criminal justice. So it's worth putting a little bit of time into, and I've probably spent more than a few hours reading some outside material to make sure I'm bringing it into you fairly to help you think through this critically. So first things first, let's go through some of these definitions. Statute of limitations, that is just basically how long you have to charge or prosecute somebody for a certain crime. In a more common sense kind of thing, you'd have to think it might not be codified in all ways. So like, let's say you're a police officer and you're driving down the street and you see a car is speeding. So I can turn around right then and I can go after that car. So that would be fair. That would be a short time frame. I see the violation that has occurred, and then I can go after that car for it. What if I see that car speeding, I remember the license plate, and 2 days later I see it again? Can I pull it over for speeding 2 days prior? No, you probably wouldn't. Now, some of that stuff isn't codified. That's meaning not written down. So There are other portions of the law where it says, you can only prosecute for a battery or an assault or even a sexual assault within a certain time frame of it having occurred and or in some cases maybe having been reported. Each of the 50 states are going to have their own sets of laws. Each of them are going to have different limitations in how long things can be prosecuted for. Preliminary hearings, as referred to in the book, and I'll show you a graphic a little bit later. Preliminary hearing, at least in Cook County, the way that we do them is that for a felony case, what will happen is I'll arrest somebody, I'll get felony approval if they give it to me. We'll talk about that too. And then they'll get charged, and a week or two after that charging event, they will have a preliminary hearing where a judge, prosecutor, and defense attorney and myself, we will all be in a courtroom and testify and for the basic facts of the case to see whether or not we had probable cause for this particular felony. Now, that is supposed to help gauge, whether or not the officer actually had probable cause to arrest. But in Cook County, where most of us live and where I work, it's also used as a bit of a screening process so that lower level felonies just get tossed. And we'll show you a graphic about, how cases get tossed later. The booking process, that's easy enough. That's when you're brought into your initial jail after an arrest. You're fingerprinted, you make your phone calls, and then you end up getting charged. Probable cause. Just as a note, I have typos for this all the time, and for some reason I always type probably cause, so that's a good note to you when you edit your work. Probable cause. This is the amount of cause or belief that you need to effect an arrest. Some people try to put it on the scale of like 1 to 100%. It's not wouldn't exactly be accurate to put that onto a percent type scale. This is basically saying that you have enough reason that a reasonable person would believe that a subject committed a particular crime. That's what the basic piece of probable cause is. Bail, which is being attempted to be reformed right now in Illinois, that's money that you pay to get out of jail. But you're not paying it off. You're not paying somebody off here. Bail creates what's called a surety. So what it is after you get arrested for something, they say, hey, you can post bond or bail for $100. So you post the $100. That $100 gets held by the state as like a retainer or an escrow, so to speak. And once you're done with the court case, that bail either comes back to you or gets you can use it to pay an attorney, or it may be forfeited to the state if you're found guilty of certain things. So bail, again, works different in all 50 states. Right now in Illinois, if you're following me on any of the social media accounts that I have, I've been posting quite a bit about this thing called House Bill 3653, and that is trying to eliminate cash bail so that essentially everybody is going to get released after arrest or after an initial arraignment hearing with a judge unless they pose a significant, serious, specific threat to a certain person. So I could go on about that for a while, but I'd encourage you to just follow me on social media because we post, and myself and a lot of other officers, retired and current, discuss that kind of stuff all the time, especially with it being a current relevant event. Grand juries, you hear a lot about grand juries. Again, these work slightly different each state, but generally it's a panel of people who will hear a case and they will approve charges against somebody. It's right in line with a preliminary hearing, but it's instead of a judge hearing it, it's a group of people, it's just a group of citizens that is pulled in for this panel, and they hear it and they will approve or not approve the charges. It's called a true bill or no bill. Plea bargaining, this is how most cases get resolved. You go into court, the prosecution says, hey, instead of seeking a jury trial or a trial with a judge, and that would potentially land you in jail for a year, we'll offer you a bargain. We'll say if you plead guilty, you do 1 week of jail time, which you've already served because you were held on bail, and then will be time considered served, and then you just do probation for a year. So a lot of people hear that and they say, oh, that's a better deal than risking a year in jail. So they'll accept a plea bargain to say, hey, I'll plead guilty as long as it's under those terms. So judges aren't necessarily required to go along with the plea. They generally do 99.9% of the time. Otherwise, it would be something that you couldn't trust in taking. But plea bargaining is how a lot of cases get pled out. And as you go through the definitions in the chapter, you'll see they explain a little bit more about that. And a bench trial is a trial with a judge instead of a jury. This is something that a lot of people opt in, and I was trying to think about it, and I'm not sure if I've ever actually had testified in a jury trial. There may have been one, but there was a very animated defense attorney who I had to give a lot of focus to, and I can't remember if that was a jury trial or not. But most things are done via bench trial with the judge, and a lot of reasons people are found not guilty of something, or the case gets thrown out, is because of something very procedural. Something along the process of the arrest was not done correctly or not testified to correctly, and a judge will know that, and the defense attorney will hang their hat on saying there was this procedural error, you must find the defendant not guilty because the due process was violated. So a lot of people go with bench trials because it's faster, and you can make those legal arguments a little bit easier with somebody who knows the law. And jury trials also take a little bit of time, and you are getting a panel of people who've been selected for jury duty. I'm not sure if you've ever had to go and serve in jury duty. I encourage you to go and do it. I had a great time last time I went to do it. I haven't been in a number of years. I have never gotten a summons since that last time. Maybe I did so good that they just didn't want me anymore. But what you want to do is going through your book, and again, you can use this template that I'm going to give you. You want to copy and paste this right into an assignment, into a Word document, or into the text box on Canvas. You can just define it right off of there. Because you're going off of the book, just somewhere in there, add your citation saying, hey, I got these from the book, the citation you've already created during week 1. That way you're covered, you're not plagiarizing anything, and I already know where you're getting it, so just throw it in there somewhere that this is where you got it from the book, and you're covered. It's good practice so that you're not plagiarizing anything. Now, onto the short answers. So I have pages and pages of stuff that I'll go through and lecture about and discuss with you in regards to each question specifically. You're more than welcome to use anything you find from the book or anything that I provide to you through here. And again, all the links are free and online, and I will give this whole thing to you so you can work on it throughout the week. So question number 1, describe how a crime actually occurs based on the data compared to, or how it compares to crime that happens based on data versus crime as it happens based on the media. So how does this affect the public's perception of law enforcement in the United States? Question number 2, what's the difference between a norm and a law? Define each term. You're going to have to go into Google or any other dictionary you want to find some definitions for those, but I'll show you in the book where this is a little bit more discussed. So define each term and discuss how they differ, how they're enforced. I'll give you some tips and tricks there. Question number 3, would you rather see an innocent person go to jail or a guilty person go free? This has to do with, it's called Packer's crime control model, which is in your book. I'll send you to the page there in a little bit. And it has to do, if you're in a statistics class, they made me take a stats class when I went to Marin Valley for criminal justice. So if you're in those courses, or if you've taken those courses, this question deals with type 1 and type 2 errors. And if you've never heard those terms before, I'll show you a graph down below. Question number 4, if there are so many ways out of the criminal justice system, and I'm going to show you this neat little graph, or a criminal justice non-system, why does the United States lead the world in incarceration rates? That non-system piece comes into play again for question number 5. Explain why criminal justice in the United States is sometimes considered a non-system, and can a non-system be systemically racist? So this popped into my head as I was reading through, and a couple other news articles I made some social media posts about. So it's very, very common that you'll hear an argument that the criminal justice system is systemically racist. So systemically means everything, top to bottom, up and down, history, future, all the members of it. That means they're calling me a racist as well, which happens quite often at work when you arrest somebody. Even people of your same race will call you racist. It's kind of funny, but generally speaking, when it happens at work, it's because they're upset that they got caught. But it made me wonder, if we have a criminal justice non-system as described in your book, is saying it's systemically racist still a fair criticism? So I'm going to go through each of these questions one by one and give you some resources, maybe some tips and tricks on how to answer them. So question number 1, perceived crime versus actual crime. Again, describe how crime that actually occurs based on data compares to how crime appears to occur based on the media. How might this affect the public's perception of law enforcement in the United States? So this is from page 3 in your book, and tables 1.1 and 1.2 have some graphics on there. So the first table talks about all these different television shows. If you follow Michelle Furlow Professor Furlow on Twitter, She had a question about this too, about media and how it perceives, and what your favorite cop shows are and stuff like that. Mine's my Lethal Weapon, by the way, I think was one of my favorite ones. I don't watch a lot of cop shows, but it talks about, like NCIS was the top cop show, horribly unrealistic television show. But how might that perceive the public's perception if that's the only contact that they have with law enforcement? Because for the most part, a lot of people don't have contact with law enforcement. There was another discussion we had on social media. I can only think of a few times that I had contact with law enforcement prior to becoming a police officer. It was all traffic stops. One of them gave me a ticket, and it happens to be the agency I currently work for, and some other cops along the way that stopped me. I got a break from California Highway Patrol, CHIPS, one time, which rarely happens. So not a lot of actual interaction that generally people have with police. So how might the television piece affect the actual perception of it? And on table 1.2, they have this as listed as their source. Now, the table that's provided, I always check your sources. The table that's provided through this link is actually a little bit different than what this link is. So let me open it up, and we'll go through it. Now, in answering the question, you're more than welcome to use anything from the book, anything we discussed, or any of the sources that they provide. Now, this is the source that they provide, and I think it's actually fairly interesting. You open up the Portland, Oregon police site. Now, in order to find the data that they used, you have to go and download some of the data. But currently, they have it in a slightly different format. So if you click around on the site, you can see what the calls for service actually entail. Because if you look at what's on TV, everything is a murder. Everything's a rape. Everything's something, terrorist attack, something. But in reality, most things that we respond to might not even be crimes. They're mostly disorderly people, unwanted subjects, suspicious activity, disturbances, noise disturbances. It's all just things that are just generally disorderly and not necessarily things that will rise to the offense of a crime. So this graph shows you in the Portland police area exactly how much of each call that they respond to. And if you're digging through and you want to find out a little bit more about each of these things, there's a tab on here where we can go through. I think it's the dashboard walkthrough. Yeah, you can go through the dashboard walkthrough, and this will talk to you about how to navigate the data. Let me just go back. And on this page here, the introduction for calls for service, it will tell you what is in each category. So like the category for civil issues, which is this little guy right here, this is what it entails. Behavioral health issues, civil disputes where it's child custody or evictions or missing people. Under the crime category, you have all these different types of crimes that may occur. And again, the crime category is right here. But the biggest category was disorder. So you can take a look at the disorder tab, and you can see all the things that might fall under disorderly conduct or a disturbance that they would respond to. So if you need assistance interpreting that data, you can click on that source. It will give you a little bit more power if you answer the question using that as a source to say, based on what we see on the TV is not representative of what's actually happening. Here's what's actually happening, and you can answer using some of that data. So question number 2, norms versus laws. What's the difference between a norm and a law? Define each term and discuss how they differ and how they are enforced. So this is a bit of a critical thinking exercise. Page 7 has a little bit about institutions of social control. Google or any other search engine you use, you can use that to go through and figure out what norms versus laws are. And from your book here, and cited so I'm not plagiarizing, Institution of Social Control is an organization that persuades people through the subtle and not so subtle or coercive, I added that in, means to abide by the dominant values of society. So as a discussion topic, if you want to use it, if you need help figuring out what to talk about for this question, think about it in terms of masks and protests. A lot of police officers, a lot of police agencies, a lot of police chiefs said we're not enforcing masks. Now, that is not to say that they didn't support mask wearing or that they didn't think the science was settled. What it had to do was with whether or not laws were actually passed that we were allowed to enforce. So in the early portions of the COVID pandemic, you started to see a couple of videos here and there where people and parents were getting kicked out of parks with their kids, threatened with arrest. Well, we can't arrest somebody unless there's a law saying that what they're doing is illegal. So many state legislatures to this day have not passed any actual legislation criminalizing being out without a mask, because it's a health suggestion, it's a health mandate. So on one hand, can you enforce something that's not a law? It's a good thing to think about, and that's somewhere you can take this to answer these questions. And same thing with protest. I think every cop I know very much supports protest. It's a very American thing to go out there and have your voice heard. And over the summer, we saw that conflated, again, going back to question 1, based on how the media represents things. We saw the protest being conflated with riots. And there's a difference between the two. Riots, there's laws against that. But protests, hey, that's a norm for the country. We don't necessarily have anything that says, actually we have things specifically saying that we shall not infringe on people's rights to protest. So how does an institution of social control enforce those things? How does it enforce a norm? How does it enforce a law? You can easily get 2 paragraphs out of that. And again, when I say answer in 2 paragraphs, I put that as a minimum because we have to set some kind of minimum. Otherwise, people try to answer these questions with one sentence, or sometimes even one word. People will try. This is the bare minimum. Merely in formulating the answer to your question, you'll probably end up with 2 paragraphs. So don't be afraid to write more than 2 paragraphs. I'm much more interested in hearing what you have to think, backed by the supporting context of articles and textbooks, than I care about you just repeating what you heard on TV or repeating what you heard in a textbook. It's not that kind of course. All critical thinking exercises here. Question number 3, free guilt versus jailed innocence. So, would you rather see an innocent person go to jail or a guilty person go free? This goes back to Packer's crime control model, which is in your book, and type 1 and type 2 errors. Now, this graph right here, this is what like a statistical graph, so to speak, would look like. So we have on this here whether or not somebody committed a crime or did not commit a crime. Blackstone's dilemma, or Blackstone's actually ratio, not ration, is what the, if you Google it, that's what will explain this a little bit more. So in the instance, let's say somebody committed a crime and they in fact go to jail. Well, that's true. That's good. That's what we want out of the criminal justice system. Now, if somebody did not commit a crime, then they should not go to jail. Also true. That's what we want out of the criminal justice system. We don't want innocent people getting locked up. So type 1 error, which is a false positive, is to say that somebody did not commit a crime and they went to jail. That's very bad. And on the other hand, we have somebody that commits a crime and doesn't go to jail. So it's a false negative. It's a type 2 error. So to give some examples, let's say somebody's committed a murder, or a murder occurs, and you arrest somebody. You take them to jail. You believe that they've committed this murder, and they get imprisoned for life because they were convicted. The evidence, whatever led to your conclusion, a jury or judge supported, and they sentenced them to life in jail for murder. But in actuality, that person didn't commit the crime. So that would be a false positive, and that would be pretty grievous to have somebody imprisoned for really any amount of time for any crime that they did not commit. Now, type 2 error, let's say I pull over somebody and I think that they've been drinking and driving. I do a little bit of investigation, and maybe I'm not well versed, or I didn't see all the cues and clues, but I think, I don't think this person's drunk. I think maybe they're just a little bit tired. They had a long day at work. You know what? I'm going to let them go. So that's somebody that doesn't go to jail, even though they were actually intoxicated. And the power of trying to view and figure out what's better or worse, let's say you let that person go and they go hurt somebody else. So it's a little bit of a dilemma. I know where I stand on it, but I'm not here to sway you one way or the other. So is it better or worse to have somebody innocent go to jail or guilty go free? If you can easily get a paragraph or 2 out of that. And because it references something in the book, the Packer's crime control model, they discuss this in the book really briefly. They say that it is broken down into 2 sides, a due process model versus a crime control model. And they refer to them as traditional liberal values and traditional conservative values. And I put these little asterisks in there because the way the book describes traditional liberal and traditional conservative values, those things it's not the best definition to try to give a political association to these two models. So like saying you're a classical liberal is the same thing as saying you're a conservative. So to say that you're traditional liberal kind of makes it sound like he's trying to say this, he's not trying to say the same thing, but that it would be coming across as the same thing as traditional conservative. So it muddies the waters a little bit. Now, if you follow my social media, I talk politics. I talk politics in the class. Now, I don't talk politics in the matter of who's right and who's wrong. What I talk about is whether or not somebody's being honest or dishonest, or what the policy implications of a certain policy are. Again, with that House bill that's coming through the pipe right now, there are some serious implications of what the House Bill 3653 will have on police officers. There are some good things in the bill. There's a lot of bad things in the bill too. I think we should scrap it, or they should scrap it and rework it so that we can take the good things and adopt them, and take the bad things out that will limit lawful authority of the police to actually keep people safe. But that's the kind of stuff that I talk about, is how the policy and how the politics of the day inform each other, how it all works, and how it will apply to the job itself. I don't talk, Democrat or Republican or, left or right necessarily. What we're talking about is the real life implications of the policy, because criminal justice is embroiled in political and policy controversy right now. So again, that is type 1 and type 2 errors, the Packers crime control model, and want to get your opinion, but obviously support it with something from the book. And then if you want to look this up, the ratio, then you can support it with something from that as well. Question number 4, if there's so many ways out of the criminal justice system or non-system, why does the United States lead the world in incarceration rates? Now I'm going to link you to this content here. I think I should have it pulled up in Photoshop as well. But want to say, with this graph, it's a good representation of some of the ways in and out of the criminal justice system. So what we have here, I have a little bit blown up of a graph here in Photoshop. Now what this shows is, you look at it from left to right, basically from a crime that occurs to how you can get brought into the system, and all these little branches that are branching off, these are all ways out of the system. So before we get going, right here where it says crime, so this is, crime that is occurring. Now, in order to even begin entry into the system, it has to be reported and observed, or, somehow, whether it's by a citizen or by a police officer, somebody's got to see it, somebody's got to report it to start that piece of it. There is a lot of crime that happens out there, big and small, that never goes reported, and people don't hear about it, don't know about it. And I mean, think about it. Just when you're on the road, how many people speed? Everybody. How many people roll a stop sign? Everybody. That's just a small thing. And I bring that small thing up because usually when you stop somebody for speeding, the first thing is, don't you have anything better to do? But when I bring that up is because, let me show you this. This is that symbol for the thin blue line. Now, a lot of police agencies are kowtowing to political pressure to remove the thin blue line imagery, because they're being told that it's a racist thing. Now, what the thin blue line actually is, well, there's nothing codified, but as far as I'm concerned, if I'm discussing the thin blue line, or I show you something about the thin blue line, what we're talking about is that there's only one cop for every couple thousand people. Actually, one on-duty cop for every couple of thousand people. So there's roughly 60,000 people in my town that I work in. There can be 250,000 going through during the day, and there's 10 to 12 cops that are working the street. So you're talking one for every 5,000 in an urban area, one for every 10,000 in a rural area. And then those ratios are important, because later on we might talk about what happened at the Capitol on January 6th. So keep that in mind, because there's only one cop for every 5,000 people. And, there's thousands of cars on the road. It's impossible for one cop to enforce all the crime that's out there. So we have to engage our community partners in order to report, observe, help solve crimes. So the thin blue line literally just means there's, one person doing the law enforcement for 5,000 people or 10,000 people, or, up or down the ratio there. That's all that means. There's nothing inherently racist about it. It's not about a code of silence. It's not about any of that. It's literally just a representation of the small percentage of people who are out there conducting law enforcement. So let me zoom into a little bit of this. So we have a crime that is occurring. Crime gets reported and observed. there's some kind of investigation and it's either arrested or it's unresolved. So immediately you might not have an offender. It might be a random crime. It might be a small thing you're not going to spend a lot of investigatory time on. So that might get kicked out. So then you actually arrest somebody. That person might get released without charges. If you even file charges, when it comes to felonies, what I talked about with the preliminary hearing earlier. So when we in Cook County have to arrest somebody for a felony, we have to contact Felony Review. It's a state's attorney's office for Cook County, and then they approve or deny the felony charges. So we tell them the case that we have, and even if it meets the letter of the law, it may not be what they actually do in Cook County. And I mean that literally. I've been told that from a number of state's attorneys that, hey, even though this is against the law, it's not what we do here. So they might use this as a screening process to get minor crimes out of the way, or instead of charging somebody with a felony, they'll deny it, and you have to charge them with some kind of associated misdemeanor if there's a misdemeanor charge for that crime. So even after charges get filed, they might get released at court without prosecution, or the charges get dropped by a victim at or during the initial appearance. Maybe the victim never shows up. You have a right to face your accuser. Maybe the victim never shows up and the case gets dismissed anyway. Maybe the cop gets sick and he's not in court. Case gets dismissed. There's a preliminary hearing. Again, that might get screened out by a judge. So for instance, I mentioned they might use this as a tool not just to get rid of cases that didn't have probable cause, but to also get rid of smaller cases. For instance, I had a case where I arrested somebody for a battery. He beat up, actually I think he beat up a prostitute, and then he brought him back to the station, searched him, and he had one pill on him. That pill was a controlled substance. So very, very minor charge for the controlled substance, and we are more worried about the battery anyway, because that has an actual victim. The pill is just a crime against the state. So we had to charge him with a felony because we had to follow the rules, go right by the book. It goes to the preliminary hearing. The guy was arrested lawfully. We had probable cause. We had a victim. She signed a complaint. He was searched lawfully, and the pill was recovered lawfully. It was all 100% lawful. The case was still dropped, citing lack of probable cause, because it was such a small case. They didn't want to deal with a one-pill felony when we have tons of other crime to deal with. So preliminary hearings may also be used. They might not be intended to be used this way, but it's a bit of a screening process to drop or dismiss cases. Then you actually hold bail for somebody, so to keep them in jail, or they get charged with a felony, and they go to the actual court pieces, which again, they may have the charges dismissed at the beginning parts of court. At trial, they might be found not guilty or be acquitted, but it's only after they're convicted that they'll actually have a chance to go and stay in prison or stay in jail, so they can appeal their sentence, and maybe the appeal gets them to a lower sanction or a lower amount of time or probation instead of staying in jail. And then there's a bunch of ways out of jail, as you can see through. So I'll provide this graph to you, but keep that in mind that most crime, like the vast majority of crime, to be honest, probably goes unobserved or unreported. Yeah, and I'm including in that like traffic, all the little minor things too. And of that, there's only one cop for every few thousand people that are out there, so only a certain amount gets reported. Only so many things actually get investigated and lead to arrests, and of those arrests, there's only so many charges. So with all these things that are going on, I want you to take a little bit of time and think, how do we keep so many people in jail if the system is essentially set up to keep people out of jail or to give a lot of outs from jail? And you have a lot of rights as an American citizen that you would not have in other countries. So people are generally very well protected through their due process rights and through their inalienable rights, and to prevent government intrusion. So think about that for a minute, and that'll help you answer that question. So let's go back to our assignment and open up here if you want to see the statistics of the United States compared to the rest of the world. All right, now I saved this one for last because I did a lot of reading, as you can see, and I'm going to link all this stuff if you want to use it. You don't have to use any of it. I'm using this as a discussion aid. So the question itself, system versus a non-system. Let me copy in the question here before we screw that one up. So explain why the criminal justice system in the United States, or the criminal justice in the United States, is sometimes considered a non-system. Can a non-system be racist? So page 14 in your book describes the system versus non-system. One of the examples they use to call it a non-system is that it's not officially, everything's not linked together. It's very, very decentralized. And there are different layers of law enforcement that might overlap. So like locally, you have a beat cop like me. I'm the one that shows up when you call 911. So we have local laws and people to enforce them locally. And I can enforce the state and the county laws depending on what county authority is being given there. So you take another level up or a little bit broader, then you have county sheriffs that are responsible for a larger geographic area in the entire county. So that overlaps with the local authority. So in my town, you might be stopped by me. In my town, you can also be stopped in traffic by a county sheriff. And you can also be stopped by a state trooper, which happens from time to time. Their broad authority goes through the whole state. And federally, they may have limited authority in the states, or between the states, they can conduct different investigations. But you might have partnerships that involve all of them. A number of years ago, I helped serve a warrant. I believe it was federal partners from the ATF and the FBI. There was a trooper. There were some county guys there. They had some local cops from another jurisdiction that led the investigation in our jurisdiction, and then they picked me to be the local representative of that jurisdiction to go serve the warrant with them. So you basically had cops from 5 to 6 to 7 different decentralized agencies conducting a search warrant. It was a knock and announce. Luckily, they opened the door, so we didn't have to hit the door or anything. But we, had this overlapping, quote unquote, system to serve this warrant because it led through all of these different decentralized layers. So thinking of it as a system, is to say like, hey, this whole thing is unified top to bottom. There's a clear-cut way through. To say that it's a non-system, it's actually a decentralized, overlapping, multi-layered approach to law enforcement and criminal justice. So to say that something is systemically racist, can we say that a non-system is systemically racist? And that's the discussion question I want you to cover. So define system and non-system, and then spend a paragraph or two. Do you think that it can be systemically racist? So to get into this discussion, what I have here, this was shared with me recently, a news report from Washtenaw County in Michigan. Now let me flip open to that news story. Now it says Washtenaw County prosecutor announces a new policy to combat racial profiling. Now this policy is listed here. It's a 10-page policy that is trying to prevent officers from doing what's called a pretext stop. So a pretext stop is essentially you make a stop for a traffic violation. However, you are looking for something else, drugs or guns or something else. But you're using the traffic violation as a manner to get into the car or to make contact with that person. So I went to the actual policy itself because you should always check your sources. And we have here from Washtenaw County Office of the Prosecuting Attorney, which is the next link down on the notes I'm going to give you. And I started reading through this whole thing, and I found something that I thought was interesting that they had said here. So it's source number 5. Nationwide study of over 200 million traffic stop records indicates black motorists are significantly more likely than white motorists to be stopped for a traffic infraction. So I'm always interested in studies like that. If you're in some of my other courses, I give you the data, which is all accessible online for Illinois. We have what's called a racial profiling stop and motorist and pedestrian stop card program. So what it is that the police officers, after we stop somebody in a public way or in traffic for a traffic stop, we have to fill out a form where we actually have to assign you to a race. So essentially, it forces officers after the fact to profile you into a particular race or category of people. So the government is forcing this categorization on you, much in the same way that back when black and white as terms were created, people were forced into those categories. Back then, it was forced for monetary reasons. And now, I'm not sure that it's being done for necessarily the right reasons, especially because they haven't updated the policy to reflect some of the disparities, some of the categories that you might consider valid. So, for instance, multiracial people do not have a category that could be easily filled out. So you're making officers guess what a person is. You're not allowed to ask them. You actually have to technically profile them in after the fact. So it's an interesting thing. We can do a longer discussion on it later. But I clicked on the study itself, which was from the Stanford Open Policing Project, which was right here. And I thought, that's interesting. I want to read that actual study. So I went to the actual study itself and started reading through it. And it mentions in here that they use a certain type of interpretation of the data. Let me see what we can say here. So it was Gary Becker proposed this test called the outcome test. Now, I had not heard of that before, so I thought I'd do a little research into what the outcome test is. The outcome test is saying that based off of how many people are stopped and how many people get searched, you compare that to how many successful searches there are. The assumption is that you would do what's most likely to be successful. So if you are discriminating one way or the other, you'll see that you're searching people at a higher rate with lower success or a lower rate with higher success, depending on how effective you are. It has a problem, though. As I read it, I thought that is making the assumption that everybody, regardless of race, gender, area, outcome, culture, city, geography, it's considering everybody to carry contraband at the same rate. So that seemed like kind of an issue, kind of an assumption that I don't think we can necessarily make unless we had some statistical backing or some evidentiary backing for that. So it's taking this assumption that everybody is committing crimes at exactly the same rate and then basing the outcome, basically the later half of an interaction, to say whether or not a person was discriminating. So I did a little bit more research, and this is, again, it's all linked in here. And I'm just showing you kind of the rabbit hole that I go down when I do this research, and I try to bring all this stuff into you. So I found this publication from Duke University, and this paper itself, it's 25 pages. Yes, I read it. To be honest, I need more practice with statistical derivations here because they got some crazy stats here as far as how they calculate everything. But it explains to you what they do and how they calculate it. And this paper, which is from 2006, or rather the older versions were from 2004, so they worked on it for a few years, basically says that the principle used in the study that's being cited here isn't necessarily the best way to go about it because it makes an assumption that everybody, regardless of gender, race, location, culture, everything, that everybody's breaking the law at the same rate, which if you take a look at really any statistic, you can break that in half by saying just based on gender, males commit a significant more amount of crime and are incarcerated for a significant more amount of crime than females are. So right on its face, you can break that apart to say that that may not be the best test to use. So I did all that rabbit holing all the way down to find that there are people that don't think that the Becker test is the best way of going about it, but this test was cited in a policy document from somebody who they leans politically a certain way that is helping inform what they want to do, and that has practical implications for what people do in the field. So now police officers, going back to original article, end up losing a tactic that was lawful and reasonable to make a stop, and during the duration of the stop, not extending it, not prolonging it, but have conversations with people and see, what they're doing, where they're coming from, and they're carrying anything. This is just good police work, and this is something that will now be either taken away or any prosecutions that would be yielded from, say, pulling somebody over for a headlight and then, gaining some other information by talking with them and it leading to a bigger arrest might no longer be valid in that county. So the policies and the political folks that are elected to these positions are informing their policies through certain things, and that affects the practice. So that's what I'm trying to get at and why I brought you down this whole rabbit hole with me here. So from that discussion, again, the question is, can you be systemically racist? Basically saying, is everything in the system wrong if it's not even a system? And I provide these links to you to say, at least in one case where they are trying to increase the equity of outcomes, they're using tests that may or may not be appropriate to the goals that they're actually working towards. We all want equality, we all want equity, we want equal representation for everything. And it's a big question of, do we force it on the back end or do we address it on the front end? So that's a good discussion for you to have. We'll talk more about it as we go through here, but all these links are available to you if you want to go through it. The bottom couple of links are incarceration trends for Illinois and Cook County, And I included those in here just because you can see a little bit about what happened earlier in the year. Once COVID was realized and policies were created, they forced a ton of people out of jail. You can see this dip here in the incarceration rate from 5,600 down to 4,200 here in Cook County. And if you, again, follow me on social media, see me posting a lot of things about, like, people were arrested for armed robbery, aggravated vehicular hijacking, murder, who were released on no bail or pushed out of jail on low bail, and went out to commit very violent crimes. So it's to show that there are implications to the policies that you are enacting. All of these pieces here are interrelated, and I know it'll be a little bit confusing, and this is week number 1, so take your time. I'm going to give all this to you. Let me scroll back up. I'm going to ask that you submit this assignment through the assignments tab this time. You can do it in a text box, or you can do it in a Word document. I don't have any Apple products, so I can't open any of the stuff that you might save on Apple. Google Docs, I'm able to access. It's kind of a pain in the butt. So Microsoft Word is preferred. If you don't have Microsoft Word, you're welcome to throw it in the text box, but you will submit this through the assignments tab. And again, if you have any questions, let me know. We're going into my work week, so I work 6 days on, and I get 3 days off. So as you're working on this stuff late at night, as you go through, just send me an email. It'll go right through to my phone. If I'm not on a call, or if I'm on a break or on lunch or something, I'll read it and respond to you as soon as possible. I do sleep during the day, though, so if you try to get a hold of me during the day, it'll be a few hours until I can get a hold of you again. All right? I know that this is a long assignment, in that there's a lot of discussion, a lot of thought that went behind it. These assignments are shorter than some of the other instructors might give you. Some of the professors will give you, 10 answers that you got to go through, and they'll grade strictly off the book and exactly what has to be said. I'm much, much more interested in your opinion backed by your reading and research. It's to help you think critically. So again, each one of these is based off of something in the book and based off of something that I brought into the course. Use any of it that you want. Just cite it if you want to use it. Don't overwork yourself. Just answer it to the best of your ability, and we'll go from there. Very short answers. You're welcome to keep it short. So this assignment will be due by the end of the day on January 31st. And good luck. Have fun with it. I look forward to hearing some of your opinions.